Some of you are probably wondering if there's a funny story attached to this hat. There is, and I'm not going to tell it tonight. Come to this other reading. Why there are words tomorrow night. I'll tell it there. Shamelessly flacking all my readings. Incidentally, books for sale at the back of the room. I'm not going to tell the funny story because this isn't really a funny novel. It's set against the background of this terrible war, which was only the first of 5. The British tried 3 times. They failed every time. Then the Soviets came, and they suffered a terrible defeat. Now we're there. And each of these would-be conquerors of Afghanistan made pretty much the same mistakes. None of them learned from the predecessors, including the British, who didn't learn from their own mistakes 40 years earlier and then 40 years later. And the strange thing is that we're kind of in the same situation now there that everybody else has been. So this book of mine, The Widow's Husband, it's told more or less from the Afghan point of view. Most of the novels, actually every other novel that's been written about this event has actually told it from the British side, sometimes self-recriminatingly, but nonetheless from the British side. My characters are people from a tiny village about 100 miles north of Kabul. This is 2 years into the invasion and occupation of Afghanistan. These guys don't even know the British are here, and they don't know that their king has been replaced because their issues are completely local. They hardly ever see anyone from outside. This is like maybe 100 pages into the novel. We haven't seen any British people yet, but this is when we first see them. Karim is a little boy. Karim ran down the mountainside yelling and puffing. "Strangers coming," he hollered. "Hide! Get the women out of sight! Strangers coming!" Ghulam Dastagir came out to see what all this commotion was about. "Strangers!" shouted his son. "Coming on horses, Papa! 3 of them!" Ghulam Dastagir frowned and walked across the village to alert the Malik. Minutes later, the 2 men rode out on donkeys. At the foot of the path to Red Pass, they did indeed see 3 men on horses coming down toward the village. One looked normal. He was wearing a long shirt and a proper turban. But the other 2, who were they? What were these strange red coats? Malik Ibrahim glanced at Dastagir, then kicked his donkey forward. The strangers reined up. One of the men in red barked something, but it wasn't Pashto or Farsi or Baluch or Arabic or any other tongue Ibrahim had ever heard. What was the proper greeting for such men? Nothing in the rules of etiquette seemed to fit. Was their headgear meant to offend? Was it meant to insult? One wore nothing at all. He was riding about the countryside with his hair completely exposed. The other, it was almost worse, wore a pot-shaped hat with a shelf attached to the front and a feather poking up from the top. Both creatures had pink skins and chins shaved obscenely bare. Their pants were so lasciviously tight that the shape of their legs showed. Indeed, their garments seemed designed for just such a display. Their heavy red jackets were shorter in front than in back, and they had tucked their shirts into their waistbands as if on purpose to make their crotches glaringly visible to anyone looking. In back, their jackets divided into 2 tail-like segments just above mid-buttock. Ibrahim instinctively brushed his own knee-length shirt down over the capacious pantaloons, protecting his privacy. The men were sitting on horses at this moment, but Ibrahim had to wonder, what did they do about their buttocks when they were performing prayer? How did they cover their hindquarters during their prostrations? Or did they simply bend down and, God forbid it, wag their butts for all to see? That scene goes on for a while, and I'm going to skip ahead. These Englishmen, these 3 Englishmen make their home near this village, and they have interactions with the villagers. Now we're with a young girl named Shahnaz. Shahnaz stuffed the soiled tablecloth into the basket with the other laundry. All right, she trilled at her mother. "You don't have to nag." Did you give the cows their hay? Her mother yelled. I can't do everything, Shawnoz screamed. You want me to wash the laundry or feed the cows? Why can't Rios feed the animals? He has his own chores, her mother scolded. When I was your age, I'd have the laundry done and the animals fed by this time of day, and I'd have said my prayers and swept the yard too, you lazy wench. All right, go. I'll tell Rios to take care of the cows. Go do the laundry, but don't go alone. Take Royal and Mobuba along. You're always going to the river by yourself. It's wrong. And ask next door, see if your aunt has anything to wash. I better not see you back till the clothes are dry. Why, a mother's hardships with such girls. No one will ever marry a lazy, bad-tempered wretch like you. We'll have to give you to a stranger. Ha! Shawnoz snorted under her breath. Stupid mother, she thought. Men wanted girls. Men didn't want girls for their skill at washing clothes. Shawnoz, with her budding body, she knew what men wanted. If the elders would get out of the way, she could have a husband any time. The elders were always fussing about could a girl sew? Did she have a sweet temper? As if anyone cared about things like that except mother-in-laws, who used to be girls themselves. How could they have forgotten? And the elders set their own standards for the groom, too. How much land did he have? How many animals? An iron-tipped plow or just a wooden one? All the things they cared about added up to some doddering, smelly old wreck. If only she could be like the girls in the stories, romanced by a warrior passing through. Shawnoz could picture it now. She'd be doing laundry by the river. He'd notice her from the rocks above, where he'd tethered his horse, and he would gaze down in fascination as she, quite unaware that she was being watched, slipped her dress off her pure, milky shoulders. Come to think of it, what did she need Mobuba and Royala for? Her mother fussed too much, that nervous wreck of a wasted little woman. Her time had gone. Very soon now, Shawnoz would be queening it over a household of her own. Her husband would be absolutely in her thrall, fascinated by her beauty, dumbstruck by her sauce, helpless in the grip of her charms, ready to give her anything she desired. Yes, anything. Embroidered blouses from Baglon, mascara from the nomads, kohl to rim her lovely eyes, jewelry, money for tattoos in secret places. Oh, once she had a husband to practice on, she'd become such an expert in the arts of pleasure. With her basket of laundry on her head, sometimes balanced on its own, sometimes held in place by fingertips, touching lightly, Shawnoz made her way down the narrow path to the river. Her calves brushed against the tall weeds lining the snake-like path. Snakes were fascinating creatures, she thought. She saw one frequently in the vegetable garden, a green whip-like fellow. She wondered if it was true what Auntie Bilqis said about a man's equipment being very like a snake. Surely it could not be as long as that, or could it? Donkeys certainly had equipment that grew as long as a snake when they were in the mating mood. Maybe if a girl stayed attentive, she would sometimes see a man's equipment poking below his trouser cuffs. Perhaps that was why Prophet Muhammad commanded that men wear their pants no shorter than ankle length. Of course, she had seen men in the river with their pants rolled up high, yet nothing showed. But they were not in a mating mood then. At a time like that, their thingies might be all curled up inside them, same as a donkey's. Shawnoz came to the edge of the grassy weeds. The path widened here and descended to the riverbank of sand and gravel. The air smelled wet. She enjoyed the conversation the river was having with itself. Gurgle, gurgle. What if she had a magic headscarf that would turn the river language into Farsi? What would the river be chattering? Salam alaikum, Shawnoz. You are the most beautiful creature in the valley. No, in the entire world. It's good to be alone with you, Shawnoz John. Take off your clothes. Shawnoz hummed as she let the conversation with the river run through her mind. She set the basket down and pulled out the soiled tablecloth. Ugh, Mama's food stains. Why did the old man have to gobble his food so quickly? As if he was competing with everyone else for dinner. She let the cloth float out into the current, holding just the corner, till the water had pulled away the solid chunks. When she was done, she rinsed her hands and glanced around. How nice to be alone. In Nana's stories, Tamina was alone just like this, washing clothes by a river, when Rustam spied her from the rocks above, just as Tamina had loosened her blouse. Shahnaz tested how Tamina might have felt by unbuttoning one button. She tugged the material to one side to expose her shoulder. No harm in this. She was alone. Then she heard the man. She pulled the blouse shut. Not that it was ever really open. He could not have seen much except, oh no, her face. She clutched the wet tablecloth to her nose, glancing about wildly, trying to spot him. The noise came again. It wasn't a word, just a sound. She looked up and saw, Wallah, one of those Angrezis everybody was talking about. That's what they called the Englishman. But what was he doing here? They had agreed not to come down to the village, people said. She stared at him, stupefied. He was coming down. Should she run? She ought to run. But her whole body felt stiff as a bone, and she just stood there as the man picked his way down to the riverbank, wearing a wide, ingratiating grin. Well, what was the point of running now? The damage had been done. He'd seen her face. Anyway, he wasn't exactly a man, was he? Were the Angrezis men like other men? Or was this more like being seen by a stallion or a bull? The Quran never said there was any shame in being seen by a male as such, only by a human male. A monkey, for example, would be permissible. This Angrezi was more like a big, hairless, clothes-wearing monkey. And he did seem harmless. He was making little clucking noises, as one might to coax a reluctant child closer, which made Shahnaz laugh. She was no child. She felt sudden pride in her ripening woman's body. He was holding something out for her to look at, a bottle. She flinched. Was he trying to tempt her with wine? She had no way to know. She'd never seen wine. She decided to let him edge closer just to get a better look. When he came within arm's length, he took a sip, wiped his lips, and then offered the bottle to her, uttering a sound like, "Good." She took the bottle then. It smelled a little like pomegranate juice. There was no rule against pomegranate juice. She put the bottle to her lips and let in a small swallow. It tasted nothing like the pomegranate juice they had here in Chorbagh. It stung the back of her throat when she swallowed, but it wasn't wine. Wine would be sweet, she assumed. This wasn't sweet. She looked back at the man and laughed. What should she be ashamed of? With the tablecloth held to her face, she was mostly covered up. Only her hands, feet, and eyes were naked to his gaze. Not that any woman in the village would forgive her for staying here. Every single one of them would consider it scandalous, those frightened rabbits. Shahnaz had a curiosity about the world that none of the others felt. None of them would ever understand her longing to step outside the line, her hunger to see and breathe. This was not so wrong, taking a drink from the Angrezi's bottle of pomegranate juice. And even if he was a man, he probably wasn't looking when she pulled her blouse to one side. Her face, okay, her face he'd seen, but if he was like a monkey, he'd probably forgotten it already. She glanced at him again, never intending to signal flirtation, but something took hold of her, a desire to see if the look she had practiced so many times in private on her girl cousins would work on a living male, even if he wasn't exactly a human male, more of a large, hairless, clothes-wearing monkey male. She cocked one shoulder, bowed her head, and looked up at him with just her eyes. To her astonishment, he was holding out a coin. It looked like a gold coin. Gold! She remembered what everybody was saying. The Angrezis were rich. Many people in the village were getting rich, doing things for the Angrezis. If he would give her a coin in exchange for nothing but one coquettish look, what harm would it do to throw him one? Who would even have to know? She reached for his bottle, and he let her have it. "Bakshish," he said invitingly, waving the coin back and forth.